tensions are flaring up again after China imposed even tighter export controls on rare earth minerals. The Trump administration saying it will set price floors across a range of industries to combat market manipulation by China.
China warning it is not afraid of a trade war with the U.S. after President Trump announced plans to impose 100% tariffs on Chinese imports and new export controls on critical software. However, the president also then softened his tone over the weekend, saying everything with China will be fine.
The stakes were growing higher by the day. Economic experts began warning of an emerging dual-world economy where two rival blocs, one centered around Washington, the other around Beijing, would compete for dominance. The Economist cautioned that if this trade war persisted for another year, globalization in its current form could collapse entirely. Multinational corporations had already started building separate supply chains, one for the American market, another for China. The costs were enormous. Efficiency was plummeting, and the world economy was splintering into factions. The pressing question now was endurance. Which nation could withstand the strain longer? China's growth had already slowed under the pressure of shrinking exports and weakening investment. Meanwhile, Beijing was working to insulate itself through alliances beyond Washington's reach. It deepened ties with Russia, Saudi Arabia, and other BRICS members, creating alternative trade routes and payment networks. RTS Global Monitor reported that more than 30 nations were already preparing to use the yuan and ruble for oil and gas transactions, effectively bypassing the US dollar. Such developments represented one of the most serious challenges to American economic supremacy in decades. Ironically, amid the escalating rhetoric and sanctions, trade between the two powers continued. Cargo ships still crossed the Pacific. Contracts were still being signed, and business conferences still took place as though nothing had changed. Yet, beneath the surface, a deep mistrust was spreading through both governments and corporations. Each new tariff or export control widened the divide, fueling uncertainty and suspicion. That uneasy calm carried an undertone of something familiar, a chill that echoed the atmosphere of the Cold War. The world appeared to be entering a new chapter defined by confrontation, not cooperation. Geopolitics, technology, and resources had fused into a single struggle for dominance, and neither side seemed willing to yield. Every factory, trade deal, and policy decision had become part of a much larger contest shaping the century ahead. Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before reporters on Thursday, measured and calm, as questions swirled around Canada's growing tensions with Beijing. He confirmed plans to meet with senior Chinese leaders soon but sidestepped speculation about a potential deal that could see Ottawa lift tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles in exchange for relief on canola exports. Carney made it clear that Canada's engagement with China was resuming after years of frosty relations, but the scope of those talks, he hinted, was far broader than a trade of tariffs. Canadian officials later confirmed that Carney could meet Chinese President Xi Jinping during two upcoming summits in Asia, a meeting that would mark a new phase in what both sides hope will be a managed, if fragile, reset. At the press conference, Carney stressed that any progress would take time and that the bilateral relationship had to be viewed through a wider lens than individual industries or commodities. It is naive to narrow such a complex partnership to a single trade-off, he explained, signaling that the talks would address not only trade but also political and security dimensions shaping the region. The tension between Ottawa and Beijing had been building for months. China's decision to impose anti-dumping duties on Canadian canola imports followed Canada's earlier move to apply 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, a symbolic show of alignment with Washington's broader effort to curb Chinese industrial expansion. China's ambassador to Canada had floated a possible compromise: remove the tariffs on vehicles, and Beijing would drop its duties on canola. But Carney avoided endorsing that proposal. He emphasized that any move by Canada would also have to account for how the United States, currently locked in its own escalating trade war with China, might respond. The situation, he implied, was far more delicate than a simple exchange of concessions. While Carney's diplomatic balancing act unfolded, another front in Canada's trade challenges was heating up in Washington. High-level negotiations were taking place between Canadian and American officials as both sides sought to ease mounting tensions over steel, aluminum, and energy. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, joined by Privy Council Clerk Michael Sabia and senior negotiators, spent the week in a U.S. Capitol meeting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Trade Representative Jameson Greer. The Canadian delegation's goal was to secure sector-specific agreements that could stabilize key industries shaken by tariffs and uncertainty. LeBlanc described the conversations as productive and said both sides recognized the urgency of finding common ground. The talks were continuing against a backdrop of rising pressure at home, where several provincial leaders were demanding that Ottawa push back harder against the Trump administration's economic maneuvers. During Carney's visit to Washington the week before, Trump had instructed his top trade officials to keep negotiating with their Canadian counterparts to reach quick deals that could ease strain on both economies. LeBlanc told reporters that if progress could be achieved on steel, aluminum, and energy, the focus could then shift to broader areas of cooperation. But the trade war's effects were already taking a toll on the auto sector. Trump's decision to impose a 25% tariff on cars and light trucks built outside the United States was designed to force automakers to bring production back to American soil. Within weeks, the impact rippled across North America. Stellantis, the parent company of Chrysler, announced a massive $13 billion investment to expand its U.S. operations, creating thousands of new jobs in Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. Part of that expansion included moving Jeep Compass production from the Brampton assembly plant in Ontario to Illinois, a move that stunned Canadian officials who had recently offered Stellantis generous subsidies and incentives worth up to $15 billion to maintain and grow its presence in Canada. Industry Minister Melanie Joly called the decision unacceptable. Speaking in New Brunswick, she criticized the company for pulling back on commitments made under agreements with both the federal and Ontario governments. She reminded reporters that public funds had supported the retooling of Brampton's facility and vowed to hold Stellantis accountable. Carney echoed those concerns, linking the company's decision directly to U.S. trade policies. He said his government would work with Stellantis to find alternative opportunities for the affected workers and ensure the company honored its pledges. That wraps up today's story. What is your take on these growing trade tensions and their impact on Canada's future? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay updated as this situation unfolds, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching and see you next time. China is warning that it is not afraid of a trade war with the United States after President Trump announced plans to impose 100% tariffs on Chinese imports and new export controls on critical software. However, the president also softened his tone over the weekend, saying everything with China will be fine. Tensions are flaring up again after China imposed even tighter export controls on rare earth minerals. The Trump administration is saying it will set price floors across a range of industries to combat market manipulation by China. Global markets are trembling again as tensions between Washington and Beijing flare up in ways the world has not seen in years. The United States has announced a sweeping set of 100% tariffs on Chinese imports, targeting everything from electronics and solar panels to electric vehicles and medical devices. Framed as a retaliation for China's rare earth export limits, the move signals something far deeper, a shift toward open economic confrontation. With the global supply chain already strained and nations scrambling to pick sides, the question now is whether this marks the start of a new era of economic warfare. How far could this escalation go? And who will bear the cost when the world's two largest economies collide? Let us dig in. Markets are reeling after Donald Trump declared that if China wanted a fight, America was ready. Within hours, those words ricocheted across the world, sending Asian stock exchanges tumbling and traders scrambling for stability. The following morning, Beijing struck back. China's Ministry of Commerce released a statement warning that the country would be forced to take countermeasures to defend national interests and safeguard the stability of global supply chains. Reports soon surfaced that Chinese officials were preparing a sweeping retaliation that could shake the foundation of modern industry. According to sources like the South China Morning Post, Beijing's plans included tightening exports of vital resources like lithium, neodymium, and praseodymium. These are the core ingredients used to produce semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, and advanced electronics. These materials are the backbone of the digital age, and China dominates nearly 90% of their global processing. Analysts at outlets like the Financial Times have explained that for the first time in over a decade, Beijing is prepared to wield its control over these resources as a geopolitical weapon. Without Chinese minerals, factories that power the world's biggest brands, such as Tesla, Apple, Intel, and Samsung, could come to a standstill. In Washington, the implications were immediately clear. The U.S. government understood that any serious supply restrictions from China could disrupt America's entire tech ecosystem. Yet Trump's inner circle revealed that retreat was not an option. He believed this was America's best opportunity to reclaim technological leadership and force a historic reset in global industry. Bloomberg Economics reported that Washington was already crafting a sweeping package of financial incentives to encourage manufacturers to relocate operations out of China and into emerging hubs like India, Vietnam, and Mexico. The goal was clear: to redraw the map of global production. Lawmakers began calling it a strategy of economic encirclement, an effort to weaken Beijing's industrial reach and reassert U.S. dominance. From China's perspective, however, this was nothing short of economic aggression, a deliberate attempt to destabilize the very foundation of its economy. Nikkei Asia reported that think tanks linked to the Chinese government had already delivered 3 response strategies to Xi Jinping. The first was financial, gradually selling off U.S. Treasury bonds, of which China holds more than $770 billion. The second involved restricting the export of high-tech components used in American defense and space industries. The third was strategic, boosting military activity in the South China Sea and conducting live exercises near Taiwan and Guam. To Washington, these measures looked like the blueprint for an economic blitz. A study from the Rand Corporation warned that China appeared ready for the first time to combine economic, military, and diplomatic pressure in a coordinated push to alter the global balance of power. The Pentagon began ramping up surveillance operations and deploying additional naval vessels to the Sea of Japan, signaling that the standoff had entered a dangerous new phase. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal revealed growing anxiety inside the U.S. government. A leaked report from the Department of Energy admitted that America's reserves of rare earth metals could sustain the semiconductor industry for no more than 7 months if Chinese supplies were halted. A prolonged cutoff would grind U.S. technology production to a halt. Despite its strong rhetoric, Beijing remained careful not to trigger full-scale panic. China's economy still relies heavily on exports, and its leaders knew that an uncontrolled escalation could backfire. Yet inside the Communist Party, the tone was shifting. According to Reuters, Xi Jinping convened a closed-door meeting where he reportedly declared that if others tried to choke China's economy, China would show it could choke them with technology. Those words, sources said, drew firm approval from senior officials and military leaders. In Washington, the response was swift. The administration announced a $400 billion national program aimed at securing America's technological independence. Plans were set for new semiconductor plants in Arizona and Ohio, expanded rare metal mining in Nevada, and the creation of a national lithium reserve. Still, experts from CNBC pointed out that such projects would take years to deliver results. The confrontation, meanwhile, was unfolding now. Across the Atlantic, panic began spreading through European capitals. Der Spiegel reported that leaders in Germany were holding emergency consultations as their auto industry faced potential collapse. German manufacturers depend heavily on Chinese materials to produce electric vehicles, and any supply cut could trigger a deep recession by spring. The head of the German Automobile Manufacturers Association warned that without Chinese lithium and magnesium, Europe's industrial machine would stall. Inside China, a massive economic restructuring was already underway. State media began promoting the slogan "Made in China for China," emphasizing a pivot towards self-sufficiency and domestic innovation. According to China Daily, the government allocated 1 trillion yuan to boost national microelectronics firms and construct new facilities for refining rare metals. The message was unmistakable. China was preparing to operate in a world where cooperation with the West could no longer be relied upon. But the United States was not out of moves either. Reports from Politico revealed that Trump's administration was considering a sweeping ban on all exports to China involving dual-use technologies, tools that could serve both civilian and military purposes. That included artificial intelligence systems, quantum processors, and advanced simulation software. A special White House task force had been created to study the feasibility of a complete technological embargo, and action analysts compared to the global shock of the 1970s oil crisis. Let us delve deeper into the historical context, broader implications, and detailed analyses based on recent developments. First, let us recall how we got here. The U.S.-China trade war did not start overnight. Its roots trace back to 2018 during Trump's first term, when initial tariffs were imposed on Chinese goods to address issues like intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and trade imbalances. Those early measures targeted about $360 billion in Chinese imports, with tariffs ranging from 7.5% to 25%. China retaliated with tariffs on around $110 billion of U.S. goods, affecting sectors like agriculture and manufacturing. A Phase 1 deal in 2020 provided a temporary truce, but tensions simmered. Fast forward to 2025, with Trump back in office, the conflict has reignited with unprecedented intensity. In February, the U.S. raised tariffs on Chinese imports to an average of 124%, more than 40 times higher than pre-war levels. This escalation was triggered by China's moves on rare earths and other critical materials. On October 9, China expanded its export controls on rare earths, adding 5 new elements and requiring extra scrutiny for semiconductor users. These controls, effective November 8, include restrictions on holmium, terbium, dysprosium, ytterbium, and lutetium, which are vital for defense, chips, and high-tech applications. China's Ministry of Commerce announced these as part of Announcement Number 61, implementing the strictest controls to date on rare earths and permanent magnets. This is not just about resources, it is about extraterritorial jurisdiction. China now requires foreign firms to get approval for exporting products containing even small amounts of rare earths, mimicking U.S. tactics. For instance, a 50% rule applies, meaning if a product has over 50% rare earth content, it falls under controls. This could disrupt global supply chains, as China processes 90% of the world's rare earths. In response, Trump threatened an additional 100% tariff on Chinese goods starting November 1, potentially reaching 155% in some cases. He also considered curbs on exports to China made with U.S. software, from laptops to jet engines. This could affect a wide array of products and cost the U.S. economy dearly. China has hit back defiantly. State media declared the U.S. is dying within, as Beijing drafts its next 5-year plan. China's Commerce Ministry warned of countermeasures if Trump does not walk back the threats. They expanded controls to battery materials and technology, effective November 8, and added 14 entities to their unreliable entity list. Analysts say China is winning this round, with its Made in China 2025 initiative advancing in AI, quantum computing, and more. The global impact is profound. Reuters reports that the trade war clouds the economic outlook, creating a new normal of fragmentation. The IMF and World Bank warn of slower global growth, with supply chains rerouting to avoid tariffs. U.S. farmers are losing billions. Size estimates $5.7 billion in soybean exports to China lost through October 2025. Europe's auto industry, reliant on Chinese lithium, faces recession risks. Germany, France, and the UK are scrambling for alternatives, but diversifying rare earth supplies could take years. In Asia, countries like Vietnam and India benefit from shifting manufacturing but face inflation from higher costs. The dual world economy is emerging, one U.S.-led with allies like Australia, which signed a rare earths deal with the U.S. to counter China. Over 30 nations are shifting to yuan and ruble for transactions, challenging the dollar's dominance. For Canada, the situation is multifaceted. As a close U.S. ally, Canada imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, aligning with Washington. China retaliated with duties on Canadian canola. But Canada is also negotiating with the U.S. to ease tariffs on steel, aluminum, and energy. Effective September 1, Canada removed some tariffs on U.S. goods, seeking reciprocity. The Bank of Canada notes subdued business outlooks amid these tensions. In the auto sector, Stellantis' shift of production from Ontario to the U.S. highlights the pain, despite Canadian subsidies. Prime Minister Carney's government is pushing back, vowing accountability. Broader talks with China include potential tariff swaps, but Carney emphasizes a holistic approach, including security. Upcoming summits could see Carney meet Xi, aiming for a reset. Provincial leaders demand tougher stances against U.S. policies. Canada's trade with China grew in imports by 7% mid-year, but exports lagged, showing vulnerability. Looking ahead, experts warn this is round 3 of the economic war, following tariff-focused phases earlier in the year. The Rand Corporation and others predict combined economic-military pressures. If unresolved, globalization could fracture, with separate tech standards, supply chains, and currencies. Costs to consumers. U.S. households face an average $1,300 tax hike from tariffs. Efficiency drops as companies duplicate operations. Yet, some see silver linings. The U.S. is investing in domestic production, like chip plants via the CHIPS Act extensions. China accelerates self-reliance in tech. Allies like Australia ramp up mining. But the human cost is real: job losses in manufacturing, higher prices for electronics and EVs, agricultural hardships. In the U.S., Midwest farmers suffer. In China, export-dependent factories idle. Europe braces for energy and auto disruptions. Developing nations caught in between may align with one side, deepening divides. Politically, Trump's strategy aims to reclaim leadership, but critics argue it isolates the U.S. In China, Xi's plenum focuses on resilience. For Canada, balancing acts continue, with Carney's diplomacy key. As tensions unfold, markets remain volatile. Asian indices down 5% last week, Wall Street jittery. Investors seek safe havens like gold. The question, will talks yield de-escalation? Trump hinted at niceness but stands firm. China signals no fear. A grand bargain seems unlikely soon, per Bloomberg. This new normal demands adaptation. Businesses diversify suppliers. Governments stockpile critical materials. Individuals face higher costs but perhaps more secure jobs long-term. History shows trade wars hurt all, but resolve through negotiation. Watch for November deadlines. Tariffs, controls activation. Summits in Asia could pivot. Stay informed, this shapes our world. Now, let us explore the rare earths angle in depth. Rare earth elements are 17 metals crucial for modern tech, from neodymium in magnets to lanthanum in batteries. China mines 60% globally but processes 90%, giving leverage. Past uses. In 2010, China cut exports to Japan over disputes, spiking prices. Now, controls target defense and chips, requiring end-user details for exports. U.S. response, partnering Australia, which has untapped deposits. A recent deal aims to process rare earths outside China. But scaling takes time. U.S. reserves last month's. Impacts on EVs, batteries need lithium, cobalt, China dominates. Tariffs make U.S. EVs costlier, slowing green transition. Solar panels, targeted to, rise in price, affecting renewables. Semiconductors, Taiwan, South Korea vulnerable. TSMC, Intel lobby for exemptions. Broader tech, AI, quantum need rare earths. Bans could stall innovation. Agriculture, U.S. soy, pork exports to China down. Farmers pivot to Brazil. China's food security pushes domestic production. Energy, potential yuan oil trades with Saudi, Russia erode petrodollar. Military, rare earths in jets, missiles. Pentagon stockpiles but warns shortages. Diplomatic, BRICS expands, challenging G7. Canada, canola hit hard, alternatives sought in India. Auto shifts like Stellantis cost jobs. Ontario unions protest. Carney's boycott America talk hurts cross-border ties. Negotiations, LeBlanc pushes sector deals. Possible outcomes, short-term pain, long-term resilience. Or prolonged war, recession. Economists split. Some see 2% global GDP hit, others adaptation mitigates. Historical parallels. Smoot-Hawley tariffs worsened depression. Cold War tech races spurred innovation. Today, fusion of econ-geopolitics. Public opinion. U.S. polls show tariff support but inflation worry. China rallies nationalism. Canada divided, pro-U.S. versus independent. Media roles, state versus free press shape narratives. Future scenarios, deal by year-end? Escalation to cyber, military, or slow decoupling. Monitor plenum outcomes, APEC summit. In conclusion, this trade war redefines global order. Costs high, but opportunities for diversification. Vigilance key as events evolve. Thank you for listening. Reflect on impacts to your life.